Our next panel is The Changing Information Landscape, Producing News in an AI-Driven World. Please welcome our speakers to the stage.
Hi, everyone. That was a fantastic video. That pretty much covered all the issues. So what do y'all want to talk about? I'm kidding. We are going to talk about AI in the news media. And it has been my experience ever since that fateful day, November 30th, that shall live in infamy, November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was unleashed on the world, that whenever I'm around people in the news media, for the most part, and utter those two letters, AI, to anyone in the news business, many immediately just go into this defensive crouch. You can see their posture literally changing. And you can't really blame folks because it's been a lot of years of social media damaging business models, disintermediating our relationship with the readers, and let's face it, just degrading the entire information ecosystem. So AI can seem on the surface like one more thing that's out to get us. But that would be a huge mistake. And that video got at it a little bit. To be sure, there are risks, and we're going to talk about those in this session. Some of them are perhaps existential, though many of them are overblown. But the key thing is AI is a set of tools. That's what it is. It doesn't have sentience, at least not yet, probably never, although some people disagree with that. It is a set of tools that can help us, serve our mission, engage with the public, and even maybe make money. It's more akin to the internet than it is to social media, not an external force, but something that can be a powerful new way for us to, again, extend our mission. But the devil's in the details, and we're going to get into all those details. And we have an absolute perfect panel here today. So I'm going to start at the end with Roman Anin, who is the founder and publisher of iStories, which is a Russian investigative news outlet now operating in exile, formerly of Novaya Gazeta. Next to Roman is Richard Gingras, who is the global vice president of news at Google, where he guides Google's strategy on how to surface news on search and Google News and smart devices. He works with journalists and news organizations all over the world. Then Glenda Gloria, who is the co-founder of Rappler, which has been around since, July 2011. Amazing. And is now executive editor. She's worked across a variety of media, including Philippine Daily Inquirer, the Manila Times, Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, and also in television. And Jane Barrett, who is the head of Reuters AI strategy, where she's leading development of generative AI tools in Reuters' global newsroom. Okay, so I want to begin by just talking about, because, again, we start from the premise that this is a set of tools that we actually can use. So I want to ask you exactly how you are using AI in your operations. Jane, I'm going to start with you. Reuters is obviously a global newsroom, so it's not just one thing, it's across your entire ecosystem and, of course, your partners. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I have to say, AI, as you say, that fateful day in November 2022, and you kind of thought, oh gosh, here's our new job. This is going to be our life now for the next few years. And the truth is that as we've looked at where we could potentially use AI in the Reuters newsroom and also for our clients, there's a list as long as your arm and your leg. There are so many things that we could possibly do. And so what we've been doing over these last months is to bucket things into three main buckets of reduce, augment, and transform. So on reduce, what are the jobs which are quite rote jobs, which take up a lot of time, quite a lot of stress, and actually that we could do which AI assisted, and it could make us faster, better, and take some of the weight off our journalists, free up their time, so we can free up more time to go and do more original reporting. Then we looked at augment, so from the reporting that we're already doing, how could we reach new audiences with that reporting in different formats? We live in a hyper-personalized world, so how could we be thinking about augmenting the work that we do? And then into the transform bucket, really thinking about, and I think we'll get onto this later on, around where opportunity turns into risk and risk turns into opportunity.
Right.
Like, what are some of the new ways that the arrival of AI is going to impact society and our expectations of how we deal with information? And therefore, what changes are we going to need to make as news publishers to make sure that we are meeting those new user expectations and creating new experiences? So far, we've been mostly focusing on those first two buckets of reduce and augment. We've had some great, some really great experimentation, some really great results. Just to give you one quick example, we can maybe get into others over the course of the panel, but as you can imagine, as a global news agency, we get a lot of press releases every single day, like hundreds and thousands of press releases every single day. And so we asked ourselves, set the hypothesis, can generative AI help us to sift through all of these press releases and get out the key facts for our journalists and help them to do that rote job at the start of the news cycle? And the answer, even in our very first POC, was a resounding yes. And then as we've worked together, we brought together people from editorial, from our data science team with TR Labs. As Steve was mentioning earlier, TR is investing at least 100 million into AI every year. So we've got the use of the labs, our own product, and our own engineering teams. And we came together, and through various iterations, we've now got a tool that our teams are using to get those first takes out of press releases. And it's funny because people always say to me, well, aren't they very worried that they're going to lose their jobs? And it's like, the adoption rate is almost 100% because they're like, I hate doing this. Yeah. This is the worst bit of my job. I want to do more interesting stuff. And so we've had a brilliant team of really early adopters embracing the technology, helping to hone it, helping to make it better, and really setting a standard, I think, across the newsroom for how AI can help us do the core of journalism, but with a human very, very firmly in the loop, and not just in the loop, but between anything AI does and the client. So it's very, very firmly checked and is trustworthy still.
Great, thank you. So Roman, I'm going to come to you next. We had an interesting conversation the other day about the way that you are using AI to source for news gathering, culling through online sources, perhaps some obscure online sources, to do investigative reporting. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. Well, so one of the biggest secrets of the regime right now is the real number of losses of the Russian army in Ukraine. And since the start of the full-scale invasion, various groups of journalists have been analyzing posts from the Russian social media, trying to at least roughly estimate the real number. And of course, this is very hard and difficult to do because, you have to analyze hundreds of thousands, dozens of thousands of these posts. And it was obvious that there is a way to automate it. And we've been developing an algorithm that would allow us to do that. And finally, yesterday, I saw the prototype, and it's working. So what it basically does, it parses posts from various social media, Russian social media like Vkontakte, Odnoklassniki, and Telegram, as well as from the various regional forums. And then AI analyzes the text, trying to understand whether the post contains information about funerals of Russian soldiers, and then adds these names to the database. And this way, we were able to find way more names of the Russian soldiers who had died in Ukraine, way more than our colleagues who do it manually. And we're going to present this investigation a bit later. We were going to make this database available so that every Russian can see, can look for the names, and can actually at least roughly understand what is the real price that they are paying for this horrible invasion. This is, for me, a perfect example how you can use AI in your investigations. But of course, we also use AI in our day-to-day work. I can't even count how many times I used, various AI tools to create D3 charts to visualize some data that's to analyze, for instance, statistics of iStories and other things that we need in our day-to-day work. We always use it. We also use it to translate our website because we mainly target the Russian audience because we want to change their attitude to the war. But we understand that some of the stories are international, and we once tried to hire an English-speaking editor. And we found the perfect candidate who used to work for a well-known international news agency. But I mean, the guy lived in London, and the salaries that are being paid for in those international news agencies for people living in London were way beyond our limits, and we decided to hire DeepL instead, which is doing a pretty good job. Still, there are some mistakes that we fix, but at least it's another approach how you can be more effective and use modern tools to largen your audience and make your stories available to even more readers.
Yeah. Translation is an incredibly powerful AI tool. Glenda, talk to us about how Rappler is using AI.
Yeah, I guess before I dive into the certain details of the projects we're working on and we have worked on, I'd like to discuss the fact that we have published our guidelines on AI. That's very important to us. Before we even tried to consider what tools are available out there, we made a public commitment that the AI tools that we're using will not replace the journalism that we do, and that it will serve the public good.
Yeah.
And then there are always 3 guiding questions that we ask every time we deploy a tool like that. Does it enrich our journalism?
Yeah.
Does it help us engage our public better and maybe help improve the public sphere we're in? And third, does it grow the business? So with those 3 points, then there's more or less a North Star going into the AI tools.
Of course, those three points should go for anything any newsroom does in
Yes.
general, but yeah.
But I guess it's an important guardrail.
Of course.
Because the AI tools are mesmerizing. They're shiny and they're easy and they're open, right? So having said that, so there's AI tools being used in the newsroom processes, and I could cite probably just 2. One, in the last elections in May 2022, there were 40,000 national and local candidates who submitted their profiles to the Commission on Elections. We deployed generative AI to put in the system the profiles that they had submitted. That's the first pass, AI doing the first pass, and the final pass would be the editors and researchers verifying that indeed the machine had embedded the exact document that was filed. And then at the back end in the CMS, this helps the editors, for example, because we're working on topics that we want to own publicly in terms of the news stories, that we have a bot in our CMS back end that alerts the editors to certain topics that she should be using to connect the stories that she's editing. So when you're an editor, you're not doing just one story. That one story you're editing belongs to a cluster of topics that Rappler wants to be an authority in. So for example, disinformation or corruption, or Rodrigo Duterte for that matter. He's not just a name in our system, he's a topic altogether. But the more exciting part would be the Rappler app. I think Maria mentioned this morning, but it's anchored in deliberative tech. But we have a very nice tool, which we call RAI, Rappler AI. So you can chat, any reader who goes to the Rappler app can chat with RAI, ask any questions of RAI, but RAI will only give you a reply from the information within Rappler, from the facts.
Have your own model.
Yes, from the facts and data that we have gathered. He or she or it is not allowed to pick up random information from outside the Rappler universe. But outside that, because that's the app that deals with the readers online, but we pull that tool to also engage our public on the ground.
Yeah.
Meaning to say that we have deployed this actually it's sort of an FGD, so it prompts you can do 5 specific questions on the issue of trust, for example. You do a workshop with students, which we do a lot, given the 3 pillars that we have, and then it prompts the questions, and there's a follow-up questions, and it can bring together a lot of participants. The tool is able to synthesize, summarize the feedback from the readers. Last month, Rappler is the first Philippine newsroom to actually collaborate with a city council to deploy this AI tool in terms of public consultations on a carless Sunday for a big avenue in Quezon City. So this is Rappler also engaging its public and introducing this kind of technology, because after all, we'll be able to harvest story ideas from those kinds of public consultation.
It's interesting that you bring up that you've developed your own language models. That's sort of a safe space that your audience can use to chat with via AI. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of the examples that we've talked about are about using AI. Your example at Reuters about the press releases, Rahman, yours about sourcing all of the open source information out there about Russian casualties, are about using AI to extract trends or themes from large amounts of data. But here you have moved over to, and I know you both are doing work on this as well, to actually using an AI tool that the public can use. So Richard, I want to come to you, because Google, and I know you in particular, are very interested in working with news publishers around the world to make sure that they can have access to tools that can help their journalism. So talk a little bit about what those are, particularly around what I was just saying, the theme of tools where users can actually touch and feel the AI themselves, in addition to sort of the news gathering capabilities.
Well, let's step back in getting there. You know, the teams I work with have been interested in using machine learning for tools in the newsroom for a long time. We introduced the first one some 6 years ago, which was Pinpoint, that used machine learning to allow investigative journalists to analyze a massive corpora of documents, 100,000 documents, and make some sense of it. Powerful set of tools allowing journalists to do what they otherwise could not do. We're now adding Gen AI to that and so on to help summarize components, again, to assist the reporter in doing that analysis in the first place. Now, we're going beyond that now. We're in work collaboratively with several organizations in pre-beta efforts to look at additional tools for the newsroom. Some of them are indeed about efficiencies in the newsroom, makes sense. Others are about how do we take and more easily do more things to assist with engagement, crafting newsletters, crafting pitches to help better drive, say, subscription flows, to help maybe understand better what their audiences are looking for and how they respond to what they're seeing. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. In fact, what I really hope, and Jane and I have talked a lot about this, about transforming, is not just how we might use AI to more efficiently do what journalists do, but how do we use AI to go beyond that, right? To really move the profession forward. I was kind of disturbed this morning when someone said that journalism has never been trusted, which, by the way, is not true. It's been a problem for the last 50 years, but that was not always true. And somehow that doesn't matter. It does matter, right? We live in a highly divisive world. We have hyper-partisan news outlets. How can we build news outlets and build approaches to journalism that help bridge those gaps, right? So, I mean, a couple of quick examples. You know, we live in a world where people are constantly driven to perceive threats that aren't real. And news media is part of this in the sense that we report on anomalous events, crime, right? But often, because it's hard, don't provide the context of whether or not that's a dangerous trend or indeed an anomaly, right? We can do better than that. In fact, we built at Google a data commons of government and NGO data on all of these subjects, but the challenge is how do we get that into the reporter's flow such that when they're writing an article, that context can appear, right? And thus maybe help people from drawing the wrong conclusions, right? You're 35 times more likely to die of cancer and heart disease than by violent crime. You're 11,000 times more likely to die of those things than terrorism. What are we going to the poll and voting on? You know, can we use it to assist? You know, Janet Coates at the University of Florida is doing this really fascinating work about linguistics in journalism. And what she wants to do is build tools to help journalists understand, am I unconsciously using language in my reportage that drives divisiveness? Are we being more careful when we talk about protests that are peaceful using words like fury and explosive, right? So how do we get there? How do we kind of help ourselves understand better how to do the journalism we need to do, not only to earn that trust, but to give people a truly accurate, fact-based view of the world that they're living in, right? There's a lot to do.
So what you're talking about is creating these tools or new capabilities that can be put in the hands of newsrooms and news organizations to provide that,
Yes.
that context, to sort of, improve, like you said, the pitches for subscriptions, et cetera. At the same time, there's a lot of concern, and you can say whether it's warranted or not, Richard, in the concern in the industry that at the same time, those same AI tools can improve, let's say, or provide that news context in Google search results in such a way that the search results themselves, a lot of it built on models that include the work of many publishers, will deliver enough of a news summary and information that there's no need to click through to the news site.
Yeah, no, I understand the fear of that scenario, and let me give you our perspective on that. I mean, look, we've been crawling the web for 20 years to get an understanding of that corpus of expression that helps us understand how to do the rankings we do in search. To understand the progressions of original reporting to put up the best sources possible, right? And yes, use now to help build language models to do that, which will then work with various parties to ground in better ways. We also are living in a very complex marketplace environment where we're seeing the emergence of answer engines that obviously may very well impact search and our position in market. And who knows how those are going to evolve. I will tell you from our perspective, and they will operate in different ways, maybe rightfully, maybe not. But one thing I've learned is when it comes to search, there is a category of query that we call no one right answer, right? If you ask me what's the definition of the word no problem, give me a quick recipe for pound cake, no problem. But you ask me about current events, you ask me about politics. These are all queries that have no single right answer. And our approach to them has always been, and our defense, given that have been constantly over the years attacked for bias, right? I remember in 2016, after that election, being attacked for bias. And our own best response is to say, we present diverse perspectives from diverse sources, as of high quality as we can identify, right? So to me, to us, it would be absolutely suicidal to say, here's the singular answer about a complex question regarding current events and politics. Because there's no way you can do that and not, in a sense, embed at least what would be perceived as an editorial point of view and be criticized for it. And we can't do that, right? So I think that's something we track very carefully. And we're not seeing a notable drop in traffic referrals out of newsy queries, right? And we'll see how that progresses, and if people see things that they don't like, then let us know, and we'll deal with it. But that point alone is going to drive us to be very careful. Now, whether the other answer engines adopt that, who knows? They may not, simply because they don't have the experience to know how dangerous a place that is to go.
Jane, I'm curious your response to this. So Reuters Contact, going back a long time, is part of the corpus of the large language models for Google, for OpenAI, and for everybody else. How are you thinking about your IP? Well, the horse is out of the barn to a great extent. How are you thinking about your IP, and what are you concerned about search replacing someone turning to a Reuters story?
Well, we obviously value our content hugely. We've been around for 173 years, and that's come at a huge cost, both financial and sadly also in terms of lives. People have gone out and really put their lives on the line, sometimes lost it, in order to be able to report the news. And we take that very, very seriously, and we take the value of our intellectual property very, very seriously. And so we engage with the companies who also see value in it, whether that's to train an LLM or to ground an LLM, or to use our news, as we were talking about just now, about to cover the US election, whatever it is. Like, there are different values of Reuters news, and so we've got a fantastic team that gets out there to people who are going to value it, and we have a conversation about what that value is and what we're going to have for it. So that's I think we're all, as an industry, recognizing the value of the news that we produce, the value of it to our businesses, but the value of it to society and everything. So we've got to defend that. And I think, to Richard's point, there are lots and lots of companies who are kind of coming up and just crawling and taking what isn't theirs. So we'll deal with that separately. But in answer to your question about the search experience, what I think is interesting is that we've seen this in our industry a few times, where another industry, usually tech, comes up with a better user experience that is more sticky, that is more pleasant, that is more engaging, that feels more relevant. And we can either sort of shout into the wind and say, it's not fair, you're stealing our audience, or we can actually look at our own shop and think, well, how are we making our experience more sticky, more relevant, more useful, and kind of take it back into our responsibility. We can only control what we can control. And so I think it's a kind of a clarion call yet again. We've seen various waves of digital transformation knock us off our feet, and I'm determined that this one we ride. This wave we ride, we don't get knocked off by it. So we control what we can control. We look at the trends, we look at our audiences, and think, how can we serve our audiences better, and what can we build for our audiences? And with AI overviews or search scientific experience, we'll keep an eye and we'll have a look and we'll see what happens. And I think as an industry and as individual publishers, we will have to respond in our own way, depending on the impact it's having on our particular business and the way that we can mitigate those things. But we can't be like King Canutes of trying to hold back the waves.
Yeah, thanks. I would, Glenda and Roman, if you want to comment on this, you can, but I think in the interest of time, if you want, I want to just move on to a different topic. So Glenda, you raised the issue at the top of your remarks earlier about sort of the North Star by which you decide whether AI is appropriate or not. Talk a little bit about how you address disclosure to the audience about how you're using AI, and what has been that response?
Well, it's an overall disclosure, for example. So in terms of the chatbot, the readers on the app are very much aware that it is an AI tool. But on the other hand, the disclosure issue is addressed by the fact that the bot is only able to harvest information from Rappler. So it's not sourced somewhere else. And I think just to connect that to what is being discussed, right? Our content is being scraped as we speak.
Yeah.
It's not as if we know who's scraping us or we are able to control that, but precisely, what's the path for journalism, right? So we have to create our own space where people are encouraged to do their own search on our site. Now, will that work? Will that be sustainable? Who knows? But at least we're doing something to protect the core business and to protect the journalism that we do.
Yeah. And you're harnessing this very powerful technology for your own
Yes,
interests. I mean,
and
for the interests of your readers, I mean, yeah.
But also it's critical that you use certain tools precisely to reconnect again with your communities, because this is not just a question of low public trust, but also because you have weak communities who are not able to understand the role of journalism in a democracy. And we're assuming here that people actually appreciate our work. And there are some communities who don't, and you can use those tools to precisely engage them.
Thanks. Roman, I want to ask you too, and again, you're welcome to comment on the intellectual property topic, but I want to ask you also about disclosure. There's sort of a school of thought, there's been sort of a debate, which I find sometimes amusing, is that any use of AI needs to be disclosed. In other words, you need to disclose in a story that you used AI to find these sources of information. I mean, to me, it's kind of silly because we don't disclose spell check was used for this story. That's AI. But I'm curious how you approach disclosure and making very transparent to your readers how you use AI.
Well, I think that sometimes it's better for people not to know what is happening under the hood, especially in the investigative reporting. We have to deal with nasty people and sometimes things that, we do might surprise people. So no, I don't think so. I believe what is important is the truth. And you gotta be credible. You gotta, of course, prove everything you write about. But I don't understand this obsession with, making everyone know that AI was involved in this or that story. I mean, for instance, when we translate stories, we do disclose. We, tell the audience that this article was translated by AI. If you find a mistake, please let us know, or better donate so that we can hire at last the English-speaking editor, right? So you can disclose and kind of benefit from the disclosure. But I wanted to touch a bit on this kind of conflict between content producers and big tech that uses this content to develop its own tools. When I think about it, for instance, when I think if someone asks Google now or any other search engine, a simple question, is there a proof that high-profile Russian politicians were kidnapping Ukrainian children and adopting them? And the answer will be based mainly on our stories and on stories of other media outlets that were investigating this case. Or for instance, if someone asks Google, are there any confessions from the Russian soldiers about war crimes that they had committed in Ukraine? Again, the answer will be mainly based on our investigations and investigations of our colleagues from other countries. So if you look at these questions and these stories, you will agree that all of them are risky, and this is the price that my colleagues pay in iStories, let alone a price that our Ukrainian colleagues pay to tell the truth to the world about what's going on in the front line. And of course, we don't want to create a situation when all the risks are on content producers and all the profits are on big tech companies. Is there a way to solve this problem? I believe there is, because as a content producer, I'm okay if my content is being used in AI tools, if I am properly credited, and if I'm compensated for the content that was produced by my colleagues who took a lot of risks to tell this truth. And simultaneously, I do respect the right of Google or any other company to provide their users, because they have hundreds of millions of users, with the best experience. I mean, look, Chrome and Google, Chrome is their own tool, and they have right to think about what is about their users and how to improve their experience. So I believe that there is a way we can solve this problem, and I'm sure that we'll do that.
Yeah. As you know, many news organizations are making deals with OpenAI, which is cutting quite large checks in many cases to news organizations for the right to, all of the archival content has already been ingested, but for new content, since many news organizations are now blocking that content. I'm just curious, just a quick round from the three publishers, whether you have a deal in place, particularly with OpenAI, that you can disclose, and whether you're blocking new content.
Well, you can read it in our annual results. We've done various deals.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say who we've done deals with, but we also, as I said before, we take it very seriously. So whether that's, we've got a team who's been working on with Datadome to see who is trying to scrape our site, with robots.txt, trying to use some of that to protect ourselves. So as I say, we take it very, very seriously, whether it's kind of what we can control or in negotiation with others.
Yeah, well, there have been initial talks with OpenAI, but we're blocking many scrapers, except Google.
Oh, there you go.
If I might add something to here, and I should note, by the way, I'm a more senior individual. I'm in my 70s. I don't have operational responsibility for things. I'm much more of a strategic advisor. But as I look at this, I have no disagreement with what Ramon said. It's very much in the ifs, right? Are we respecting copyright? Are we given appropriate attribution? All of those things should be true. And that also being said, as the marketplace of answer engines evolves, will there be licensing of grounding content, not language model training, but grounding content? I have no doubt about it. I would, however, caution people in the news industry to be careful about developing an exaggerated sense of what that content might be worth in that environment. I think that's a big open question. The very nature and size of the AI information market right now is a huge question mark, with a lot of people spending billions of dollars going after it, and there's a lot of money to be made in science, no question. But how much is to be made in information and what the margins are, who knows? But I will also tell you the same math in the marketplace of information will persist, which is that there are certain kinds of information that are valuable and a certain kind that are much less so because they're commodity oriented, right? And I can tell you, for instance, I know the value of a travel query and what we might want to do to license proprietary data to do a better job on that travel query, absolutely. News, not so much. There's no money to be made there. And I'd be kind of cautious about that because what you may well see, I remember, there was a controversy several years ago about whether Google was going back into China with a search engine. And my answer was, why would we go back into China with a search engine? We could go back into China with an answer engine that had nothing to do with current events and politics and only dealt with those wonderful functional areas of how I cook food, make my lifestyle better, which, by the way, is where all the money is.
Yeah.
And explicitly avoid news, which I don't think is really where we want to be, which means we have to develop a pretty sane understanding of how this might play out and be very careful about our expectations.
I want to move, we have just a couple of minutes left, so I want to move into questions. I'm going to read two questions, and then we'll do sort of a rapid fire, because that's all we have time for. One is a question, is there a risk that AI adoption proves so costly that only wealthy or well-equipped outlets can afford it, thus adding on to the survival challenges to many newsrooms and the general information ecosystem? In a moment, I'm going to ask Roman and Glenda to answer that one, not you for obvious reasons, as a well-equipped, wonderful newsroom. And the second question is, a lot of discussions about regulation have been presented today. As people who use AI in the newsroom, what regulation would you propose? All right, let's start with the first one. Roman, we'll have to do it quickly. Roman and Glenda, are you concerned that these tools will become out of reach for you and only large news organizations will benefit?
I am concerned because we spend, for us, a significant amount of money on AI tools. Well, we're talking about thousands of dollars per month, which is significant for us.
Yeah.
I think I am more concerned in the impact of AI tools on journalism and how we do it. Because certain AI tools really ruin the process of discovery, right? I mean, I'm old enough to say that I was trained to be a journalist, and the process of discovery is the joyful process.
Serendipity was the word we've always used.
And you hone your instincts as a reporter, as you search, as you learn to connect the dots, as you talk to people. But certain AI tools can do that for you. So there are no active discussions in the newsroom about those tools because I discourage them precisely. Because then you want to keep the discipline of journalism very much alive, especially at this time.
Thank you. And the regulation question, Jane, I'll turn that to you. Is there any regulation that you at Reuters thinks would benefit to news media? And then I'm going to let you answer that question, Richard.
Look, regulation is so tricky for us. We're an international news organization. We're in 160 countries, so we're having to deal with regulations all over the place. And so we're very used to kind of having to flex, and we've got brilliant people all around the world who are having to deal with regulations, around things that you can't even imagine that they're having to spend time on. And so it's a really tricky area, right? Because you can get yourself tied up in so much red tape. And I think where I come back to, and Catherine Larson, our GC, would be give you very many more details about it. But it's like we've already got laws around copyright and intellectual property and fair use and everything else like that. Like, let's just actually implement those ones properly first, right, before we start talking about regulation. Because my fear is that if we start to try and get regulation about this, that, I mean, we already see what the sort of spaghetti bolognese is of the EU AI Act and of some of the other regulation that's being spoken about and how many loopholes people are already complaining about and the like. It's like that will work itself out. I think as journalists, we also have an extra tool. We're not just users of AI and developers of AI, we're also reporters on AI. And so I think actually our reporters can get out there and actually truly report on regulation and the impact that it's having, and that's a good point that we can add to.
You raise a great point, which is, there is no such thing as an AI exemption to all the existing laws on the books. Richard, I'm going to have to ask you to do this in 30 seconds. Sorry.
Well, I don't have any specific proposal. I'm sure things will evolve, but I think we need to be cautious. There was a comment this morning that said about hiding behind the smokescreen of First Amendment and free expression. And honestly, I went like, what the fuck? Right? We're here about the independent free press, right? Are we aware of the dangers of going down that road of deciding what's appropriate to express in a world of awful versus lawful and what's not? And who gets to decide that? Here we are increasingly shifting away from democracies towards authoritarians, and we're saying, oh, please set rules about what we can say? I mean, seriously, we need to be, and I'm not saying, we just need to be really thoughtful, right? I'm on the board of this Policy Research Institute, Center for News Technology Innovation. Maria's on it, Marty Barron's on it. And one of the key points is not advocacy, it's saying, are we studying things and understanding not what we perceive to be the direct effects, but the secondary consequences?
Yeah.
Right? And one thing we learned is when it comes to legislation around the world with regard to fake news, beware, because you're creating machinery that can just easily be used to constrain the press depending on the nobility or lack thereof of the next people in power. Thank you.
That's the great place to leave it on, free expression. Jane, Glenda, Richard, Ramon, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay.